in the West Indies. But look how narrow this passage is. You see the tugboat here? The tugboat is actually steering this vessel. You're looking at the stern of the vessel. And there's another tugboat that's pulling it to find a berth, a place where it can be moored, be tied up. And then they'll offload goods and likely inload goods. This is Henry Flagler. This is one of his steamboats. He had tourism as early as 1897. He was taking people down to the Florida Keys, to Cuba, to the Bahamas. This is the mouth of the Miami River. Look at the trees here. This is Brickell Point. The Brickell's at an Indian trading post here, which would be another very distinctive ethnic group in the Miami area. The Seminoles, we know them today as the Miccosukes, were very, very visible in early Miami. This is the government cut, the deep water channel for the cruise ships that separates the southern tip of Miami Beach right here from an area outside of the picture we know as Fisher Island. That's Henry Flagler, a co-founder of Standard Oil with John D. Rockefeller, came to St. Augustine at the end of the 1870s, loved it. He'd been in Ohio and New York, decided to make it his home, and bought a small railroad line, extended it all the way down the East Coast, in fact, all the way to Key West by 1912, the famous Overseas Railroad. Believe it or not, this is the eastern terminus of Flagler Stadium. Where this guy is standing, this is today's Bayfront Park. This was, it says here 1896, which was the city's birth year. You can see how there was very little going on. You only had about 700 people that first year after the train arrived. This is part of what we call Pier 5. This is where Bayside is today, believe it or not. And that's the great Miami News Freedom Tower. Its tower was inspired by the great cathedral in Sevilla, Spain. That's where Brother Francisco Villarreal, the Jesuit brother at the Tequesta Mission in 1567, he brought a small number of Tequestas to be baptized into the Catholic religion. See what else we have here. This would be the waterfront of Miami. This is the brand new Bayfront Park of the 1920s. These ships are carrying a lot of building supplies as part of the great real estate boom of that era. Just another look. See, here's a cruise ship. We've long had a cruise ship tradition in this area. The weather's great. We're connected by waterways. We point south. A lot of tourists like to come. We had 4.8 million people in and out of the Port of Miami last year as tourists, as cruise ship goers. Just more of that landfill. This is the aftermath of the hurricane in 1926. Look at the destruction to the coconut palm trees here. Here's some more destruction scenes. That's a beautiful scene of Miami News Freedom Tower. Some of those fishing boats as part of Pier 5. Just an overview of the park. This is the Royal Palm Hotel. Henry Flagler built this magnificent hotel in 1896 and it opened in 1897. This is where a lot of well-to-do Americans came, the Carnegies and the Vanderbilts and others, beginning in 1897. That's the entrance to Pier 5. And that was up until 1969. It was torn down, and ultimately, almost 20 years later, Bayside opened up on that site. But this is how rustic it was. Look at the coconut palm tree there. We had tens of thousands of coconut palms. Many were wiped out by something called the lethal yellow plague in the late 1970s. So it's a remarkably different landscape today. More Pier 5, great shots. This was the home of Julia Tuttle. This earlier was a slave plantation house built by a man named William English in the 1840s. This stood about where the Hyatt Regency Hotel is in downtown Miami in the north bank of the river. These were slave quarters at one time. Not at this time. These are slave quarters. This building was moved in 1925 to Lomas Park in downtown Miami. I teach a class on Miami, South Florida history every semester, and I brought my class into this building last night. It's very historic. This was also the courthouse for Dade County in the 1880s. This is the North Fork of the Miami River. Look at this here, how rustic this is. This is high ground. Once you get out where the cursor is, you're hitting what would be the eastern edge of the Everglades. That's how close in it was. We're back to the house. Let's do this. It's about 20 to 3. Let's go to questions that anybody here might have. Any questions about anything we've said or haven't said, since we kind of moved through this pretty quickly? Anybody? Questions anybody might have? Yes, huh? Okay, I just picked up on the Key Biscayne. Why don't you just talk into the mic that is being handed to you now so we can all hear your question.
Around how big was Key Biscayne before it was developed?
Key Biscayne is 2,200 acres, and it was a coconut plantation as late as the 1940s. There were about 40,000 coconut palms. And it's very interesting, and I think Father Alvarez will appreciate this. The family that owned most of Key Biscayne was the Matheson family. And the wife of one of the sons of the patriarch of the family, his name was William J. Matheson. He had a son, Hugh Matheson. His wife was very religious and was very connected to Jesu, the great Jesuit church downtown that you all know about. And in order to help Jesu during the Great Depression, she'd have her workers pull down as many coconuts from the coconut palms, as well as Jesu altar boys. There was no causeway until 1947, and they would just bring on a barge over to Jesu or to the Miami River of Biscayne Bay these coconuts, and they would sell them on the steps of the church after Mass. I mean, the Great Depression was a tough time. Any way you could earn a little bit of money. Questions? And we haven't really talked enough about the Jesuits and Jesu, and I'd like to speak about that a little bit, but let's just go ahead and hear the gentleman who asked today. Yes, sir.
If most of Miami was reclaimed land, how would it be considered fertile land for farming?
If most of Miami was what?
Reclaimed?
Reclaimed. Most of Miami-Dade County is reclaimed. Miami, the city, from the bay west for a few miles, is very irregular. It's what we call the Atlantic Coastal Ridge. It's on higher ground. Miami's soil is not rich. The richest soil in the city of Miami is in Alapata. In fact, there was even farming going on as late as the 1950s in Alapata. That would be in the north bank of the river, as you move and say past the Orange Bowl site, the Marlin Ballpark, across the river from there. That was the richest farming area, but the soil is not rich. It's sandy. And then when you get past the ridge, see, the idea of planting the Everglades was we're going to create the richest farmland in the world. That was the idea on the part of the governor of Florida and many other people going back to the 1840s. And they did farm in the Everglades, and it is productive. I mean, look at the capital of the sugarcane industry in America is the former Everglades, west of Lake Okeechobee. So it is fairly fertile. But what's happened to the Everglades, the drainage of the Everglades, is that's become suburban. In our case, all the way out to Chrome Avenue, 167. And in the case of Fort Lauderdale, all the way out to Highway, or Broward County, all the way to Highway 27. So we really kind of skipped that farming stage, but we're really unusual here in that we have a large farming belt way down in deep South Dade. That homestead area, sometimes referred to as the Redlands. Very unusual. Have an urban area that's among the largest in the country, and yet having a large farming sector. And that is shrinking as we speak. More and more developments going on there. Questions anybody might have? Anybody? Yes. It's a typical student response to a teacher. I've been there. I've been there.
My reputation precedes. When you talk about the Jesuit influence down here, you talk about the Arab and the different missions. I remember the old Miami library.
Yes.
There used to be a Bayside.
A Bayfront Park, yes.
Park.
Yes.
There used to be a commemorative plaque to a play that was authored by the Arab and that he taught a lot of the indigenous people.
Yes.
Remember, I know obviously the old library was.
It was knocked down in 1986. Yeah.
What happened to that plaque?
I don't know, but Father Elvis has been astute enough historically to come up with two fantastic historical markers. I believe one of which stood in Bayfront Park. Is that right, Father? Both of us stood in Bayfront Park. And as you approach Jesu Church, and I think probably a lot of y'all have been to Jesu, and I encourage you all to go there. It's fantastic. You'll see the bronze markers. The others, I don't know, they put them in, quote, storage, which is a generic term for anything.
Would it be in the Miami Museum now, the History of Miami?
Yeah, I don't think it is. I'm the historian for the History of Miami. I've never seen it over there. But I know what you mean, though. Brother Francisco Villarreal did conduct a bicultural play between some of the Spaniards that had soldiers there, and of course himself, and some of the Native Americans, and including children of the Native Americans. And that was in 1567, which is amazing. But you're to be commended for remembering that marker. You really are. Because, it's long forgotten, unfortunately. I don't care what generation it is. Kids always have this kind of take on things. It's great. You know, if you're not a kid and you're not irreverent, there's something wrong. You've got to be irreverent when you're young. You've got to be. Yes, sir.
Earlier you said that 2 out of every 3 people living in Miami were immigrants. Did you mean that they themselves moved here, or they were children of immigrants as well?
No. 2 out of every 3 in the city of Miami, not in the county. There's about 450,000 people in the city, are immigrants. It's shocking. This is as of about 2008, 2009. So it's about 5 years. But I'm just going to make the assumption that that percentage has either held or it's even more now. It's shocking. And I remember reading it in the newspaper a couple times in the Herald and clipping it out. I've got files like you can't imagine. And I have it on my files. So if you want to come by someday and share it with me, you can do that. Or you can go online with your library card and you can access the entire Index Miami Herald from 1982 to the present. And which is a great resource for doing research in local history. Okay? You know, you just type in, some catchwords, and that would come up. Yes, I'd love to talk about the Jesuits. I'm so sorry I gave them short shrift. We have a tremendous link between the Jesuits who were here almost 500 years ago and the Jesuits of today. We know that the last Jesuit mission closed not too long after it opened in 1743, and the Jesuit presence more or less disappeared from the Miami area for about 150 years. And then in the early 1890s, as more and more communities along Lake Worth and Palm Beach County and Biscayne Bay and Greater Miami began to grow, the Jesuits based in Tampa sent Jesuit priests almost as missionaries to this area. And they began to plant, the cross and the soil and sand of this area. And out of that, of course, would grow the Church of the Holy Name, today's Jesu, in 1896. On land, same location, on land given to it by Henry Flagler, who was a good Presbyterian. In fact, I remember making a point, I hadn't thought about this in years. Jesu in downtown Miami is the oldest institution on its original site anywhere in Miami-Dade County, and probably anywhere north of the Florida Keys, up to, say, Palm Beach County. It's been on that site from the beginning. So the Jesuit influence was interesting. You had the missions, and then you had a modern-day kind of a mission thing, and they went around, they ministered the sacraments to communities, and then as that railroad of Flaggers moved farther south and the area began to grow, they began to establish a stronger presence. And Jesuit Church, formerly the Church of the Holy Name, is the oldest Catholic church between Key West and West Palm Beach. And there wouldn't be another one in the whole area between those 2 points until 1921 when St. Anthony's opened in Fort Lauderdale, which was not Jesuit. So the Jesuit presence has been absolutely amazing here. In terms of Belen, I think you know the story better than I do. When Belen first arrived, where were they temporarily housed? The school? In Jesu's School, which is just east of the rectory of Jesu in downtown Miami. That was 1961. Then they moved by 62 to Southwest 8th Street and 7th Avenue before they came out here many years later. So we've had this very tight connection between ancient Miami history and the Miami of today, really with the Jesuits. And between Father's Congregation Jesu and Belen, these are probably our 2 most obvious manifestations today of the connection between yesterday and today among the Jesuits. Questions anybody might have? Yes, sir.
Hey, talk real quick about how West Kendall developed his development of West Kendall.
Well, yeah, West Kendall's all part of a massive suburban development all over the United States, as we know, after World War II, for many reasons, GI housing and things of that nature. Suburbia grew very quickly. But West Kendall is like a post-suburban development. It doesn't really begin to take off until the 1980s. So if you lived in the Miami of 7 years ago, you lived either in the center or in the nearby neighborhoods, Alapata. The farthest would have been Miami Shores, another far would have been Coral Gables. After World War II, there's a great population explosion. There's a lot more money around to spend, and people begin to develop these suburban tracts. as you move west, as you move south, as you move north. And West Kendall developed relatively quickly because East Kendall had been so successful as development. East Kendall, let's just say the area around the Dayland Mall. That area, as late as the end of the 1950s, was farm country and horse country. But as the population of the county not only grew, but as developers came through and began to plat these subdivisions, more and more people moved there. And that success then just propelled more development farther and farther west. They widened the roads, they put the expressways and turnpikes through, and suddenly you had this behemoth development. Last time I looked, I've written a history of South Dade. I wrote a book on South Dade about 20 years ago. And a book you write on Dade County 20 years ago is outdated now because things have changed so much. But at that time, Kendall, say in 1995 when the book was published, it's never been incorporated. So the population was a pretty educated estimate of about 400,000 people. And obviously today there's a lot more than that out there. That's one reason why it's just so impossible to come into town in the mornings or to go back out in the afternoons or evenings. We have time for one more question, Martha, is that it? One more question? Okay. Boy, you all are making me work today, I'll tell you that. It's good, it's good. Yes,
So in your opinion, do you think the, I guess, economic or cultural or political, or which was like the most important factor that influenced like the city of Miami's growth, I guess, was it the economic prosperity that they probably saw in it, or was it just the cultural diversity that the city had?
well, the cultural diversity only came when more and more people of different backgrounds came. The most important development behind it, the reason for Miami's growth, I think, is location. Early on, the early generations of growth, people from the north trying to get out of the cold. And in the last 50, 60 years, people fleeing tyrannies in the Caribbean, South America, Central America, Latin America, West Indies, and coming up here. Now, Miami really is a modern manifestation of what's been happening in America in terms of immigration history for the last 300 years. People are coming here for economic opportunity, political freedom, and to a lesser degree, religious freedom. And that's been the story of America for a long time. If you look at the early colonies, the British colonies in America, a lot of that was based on the quest for religious freedom. That's less so today, but it's still important to different sectors. Jews coming to New York from the Soviet Union in the late 1970s, for example. Or Jews coming to New York and Philadelphia in the 1870s because they were persecuted in Western Russia. So there was still that religious basis, but really it's economic opportunity, it's political freedom. And Miami, because the location is ideally suited for that. Julia Tuttle is said to have said, I don't know if this is documented, that she predicted one day this to be a great nexus to the Americas. It is. It would be a great trading area. It is. And she thought that this would probably have the strongest Caribbean West Indian influence of any city in the United States. It does. Now, whether she really said that or not, I'm not sure. I haven't really seen the documentation, but that's been passed along. Okay. Martin?
Can you talk a little bit about the train and Henry Flagler and so on? How important
Okay, you want me to spare these poor people with that train down in the Florida Keys? Henry Flagler's train opened up Miami to develop. It had moved down the East Coast from the end of the 1880s, entered Miami in 1896. Julia Tuttle, the mother of Miami, is the lady that helped to convince Flagler in 1895 to move his train down. Until that time, he could only approach the area by boat and by sailboat. There were no motor boats, maybe some steamboats, but almost everybody sailed. It takes a long time. And once that train entered Miami, it just opened it up for development. And of course, Flagler wasn't content with just bringing the train in. He built a port, and he built a couple blocks of homes, and he built a grand hotel. We saw that among the images. So everything just really changed radically once Flagler came. It's fine. Okay? Yes, sir.
Do you mind talking a little more about the war and Miami's part in it, with the training and everything?
Yeah, Miami, because Miami's an ideal, or was an ideal area, probably still is, for military training for three reasons. It's flat, there's a lot of water nearby, and the weather's good most of the year. And that really was conducive. You had men training here in 1898 for the Spanish-American War to go to Cuba. They never went. 7,000 people in the city, maybe 1,200 people. You had a lot of men training here in World War I. Many of them did go overseas. In fact, we had pilots training around near the airport today under the guidance of a man named Glenn Curtis, who held pilot license #1 in America. And they did see action. And we had all kinds of men and women trained here in the 1940s. The Army Air Force on the beach, again, the Navy on the waterfront, the Army command of the airport. You had an anti-submarine school on the waterfront because German submarines were in these waters. It just goes on and on and on. So you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of men and women who trained here. And they lived here for a while. Some lived, for many more months, and others lived here. They were here. And there was a famous writer at one time, his name was Damon Runyon. He once used the phrase that a lot of people came down here during the war and they got sand in their shoes and decided to come back once peace came and establish themselves anew in a new environment. So the wars had, our training for the military has had a tremendous influence on the development of this area. Homestead Air Force Base opened in 1955. It was a strategic air command base, which meant that it had planes that were carrying nuclear weapons. It was one of X number of bases in the country and in the world that had that. So there's been a lot of things that have gone on that have really induced a lot of people to come here related to the military. I want to thank you all so much and had a great time here with you. Hope to see you again. Thank you. Thank you. Y'all are great. And now school with me, which is great too, right? This is true. Don't come back on Monday now. I believe school's closed, right, Martin? On Monday? Don't come here on Monday because it'll be all locked up. I don't think anybody's going to make that mistake. I doubt that. Thank you.